Here's the rewritten script in simple English. Picture this. You wake up in 2030, rub the sleep out of your eyes, and suddenly realize that one lonely XRP sitting in your forgotten digital wallet is now worth more than your friend's brand new electric car. That sounds completely crazy, right? But stay with me, because today I am going to walk you through the boldest valuation study I have ever read, and I promise, by the end of it, you will either have your mind completely blown or at least have your skepticism seriously challenged. Last night, while everyone else was watching their favorite shows, I was deep into reading Valhill Capital's latest detailed analysis of XRP. They used something called the Athey and Michnik model, and the short version is this. These analysts think a single XRP could be worth somewhere around 4,113 by 2030. Yes, you read that correctly. Over $4,000 per XRP. And under more optimistic assumptions, the number climbs up toward $9,000. Now, before we all quit our day jobs and start making wild plans, let us break down exactly how they arrived at those numbers. First thing to understand is that the model completely flips the usual way people think about XRP. Instead of only looking at how much money flows through XRP as a payment tool, Valhill Capital looks much deeper and focuses on something called store of value. Think of store of value the way people think about gold. Gold is not just useful because you can make jewelry out of it. People hold gold because they believe it will keep its value or grow over time. Valhill is saying XRP could develop that same quality. In fact, they weigh the store of value function so heavily, it essentially drives the entire model. The core idea is actually pretty simple once you understand it. More adoption leads to a higher price. A higher price makes people want to hold and keep their XRP rather than spend it. More people holding and not selling means less XRP is available on the market. Less available supply with the same or growing demand pushes the price even higher. And then that higher price attracts even more adoption and attention. It is a feedback loop that keeps feeding itself, like a karaoke night where the more people drink, the more they sing, and the more they sing, the more people want to join in. Each verse of this story is hopefully a little more profitable than the last. So let us talk about the actual numbers, because I love a good set of statistics. Their conservative scenario, and I am using the biggest air quotes possible when I say conservative, assumes that 10% of all global cross-border transactions happen on the XRP ledger by 2030. That works out to roughly 700 billion moving across the ledger every single day at 1-second settlement speeds. They lock the circulating supply at 56.5 billion XRP, apply a 10% discount rate, and give the adoption story 5 years to develop. When you put all of those ingredients together, the model produces that headline price tag of $4,113 per XRP. Now here is where the story gets really interesting. Valhill introduces what they call a victorious cycle flywheel. Think of a giant spinning wheel in an old-fashioned mill. The first push takes a lot of effort to get it moving, but once it is spinning, every additional push adds more and more momentum with less and less effort. In XRP's world, that first push is real adoption. More banks start using it. More companies that send money across borders start using it. Regular people sending money home to their families in other countries realize it is faster and cheaper, and they start using it. The world begins to move on this new system. As that happens, the price starts to tick upward. Suddenly, owning some XRP feels like owning beachfront property before anyone else realizes how valuable that location is going to become. Long-term holders step in and keep their XRP rather than selling it. This reduces the available supply. Every new wave of demand is another push on that flywheel. And before long, XRP stops being just a payment tool and starts becoming something people hold as a store of value, like digital gold. If you want to dig into research and analysis like this, every single day there is a link to our free educational Discord server in the description below. You can tear apart reports like this one alongside other people who are just as passionate about understanding the data. Whether you are a data nerd or just someone who wants to understand what is happening with their investment, you will find people like you there. Now let us zoom out to the really mind-bending number in this model. Valhill's analysis works with a potential addressable market of $530 trillion. Let that number sink in for a moment. $530 trillion. That is a number so large that most people read it twice because their brain assumes there must be extra zeros by mistake. The argument is that if a digital asset perfectly combines speed, security, and real-world acceptance, then global liquidity could start flowing into it faster than kids chasing an ice cream truck on a hot summer afternoon. If you stretch that store of value demand all the way to $1 quadrillion, the model produces a price that makes $9,000 per XRP look almost modest. Even in a much more conservative scenario, using $100 trillion in store of value demand, you are still looking at $98 per XRP. That number alone seems worth writing down somewhere memorable. Now, of course, models are only as good as the assumptions you feed into them. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say. And Valhill openly admits they are not even including massive markets like derivatives or real estate in their calculations. They are also acknowledging that future use cases and central bank digital currency developments could change everything. So the model is simultaneously bold and strangely conservative at the same time. It is like someone showing up to a party dressed as a banker holding a sign that says, "But I could have been even bigger." Let me get personal for a moment. Back in 2018, I bought my first batch of XRP out of pure fear of missing out. Prices were falling and the general mood around crypto was terrible. I remember thinking, at least it settles quickly. Fast forward to today and the conversation has completely transformed from it is fast to it could potentially be the backbone of global liquidity. That is a genuinely massive shift in thinking, and every time I try to explain it to my dad, who still writes paper checks at the grocery store, I break it down like this. Imagine if the dollar, PayPal, and gold all combined to have a baby. XRP wants to be that baby. My dad still scratches his head, but at least he has stopped calling crypto internet beans. Now a quick word about Blowfin. That affiliate link in the description does help support this channel. If you are going to trade anyway and want to explore an exchange with transparent fees, then Blowfin is worth checking out. Every click on that link helps keep the coffee cup full so I can keep discussing these enormous valuation models with you. Back to the numbers. One of the model's most important ingredients is that 1-second settlement speed. Imagine $700 billion flying around the world in the time it takes you to blink. 1-second settlement is not just an impressive technical achievement. It is a fundamental change in how efficiently money can be used. Businesses can cycle through their funds much faster. Corporate treasuries can shrink the idle cash they keep sitting around doing nothing. And traditional foreign exchange operations start looking as outdated as a blockbuster video store in the age of Netflix. The more I think about that, the more I realize we are not just talking about a price chart going up. We are talking about a potential complete rewiring of how money actually moves around the world. And yet, here is the problem that everyone faces: skepticism. Ask a random friend whether they think XRP could hit $4,000, and you will probably get an eye roll so dramatic it could power a small generator. And honestly, that reaction is fair. Crypto has gone through more hype cycles than the fashion industry. But remember when the first iPhone came out, and people said a touchscreen keyboard will never work? Human beings are naturally bad at thinking about exponential growth. We think in straight lines by default, and charts that curve upward like a ski jump tend to break our brains a little. Valhill's answer to this psychological challenge is the flywheel concept. Once people actually witness a small but real demand-driven price increase, their confidence grows and the momentum builds on itself. It is like watching that one cautious coworker finally buy Bitcoin and then suddenly become a financial expert on social media overnight. In the world of economic modeling, that self-reinforcing feedback loop could actually push adoption rates well beyond that initial conservative 10% estimate, making what seemed cautious turn out to be wildly understated. Let me paint a real-world picture to make this more concrete. Imagine a worker in the UAE sending their monthly salary back to their family in India. Right now, that money has to hop through multiple correspondent banks along the way, each one taking a fee and adding delays. It is expensive and slow. Plug XRP into that corridor, and that money travels across borders in seconds for a tiny fraction of the cost. If even a portion of the $700 billion in daily global remittance and payment flows starts moving this way, you are essentially giving that flywheel a massive push. The same logic applies to trillion-dollar foreign exchange markets where companies desperately want speed and cost certainty. But there is still one giant challenge that cannot be ignored, and that is regulation. Val Hill does not try to predict how specific court cases will go or which political decisions will be made, which is smart because that situation changes every week. What they do argue is that once there is meaningful regulatory clarity in the major financial markets, and once institutions see a clear green light from regulators, the speed of adoption could be breathtaking. That is why the 5-year adoption window in their model matters. It is far enough away to allow the regulatory and legal situations to resolve themselves, but close enough that you can actually imagine it happening within your own lifetime without needing to picture some distant science fiction future. Reading the sensitivity analysis in this report genuinely gave me one of those dramatic movie trailer moments. When you adjust a few assumptions, say global store of value demand creeps toward $1 quadrillion because sovereign wealth funds around the world decide to hold a chunk of digital liquidity as a hedge against currency risk, suddenly $9,000 per XRP starts feeling less like a moon landing fantasy and more like planning an international vacation. Does it feel crazy? Absolutely. But is it mathematically impossible? According to Val Hill Capital, no, it is not. And remember, they are excluding entire massive asset classes from their calculations entirely. It is like ranking the best pizzas, but deliberately ignoring the entire pepperoni category. I can already hear the skeptics typing. What about all those utility tokens that failed completely? And that is a completely fair point. The crypto graveyard is very well populated. But XRP's case is not just about speed. It is about the feedback flywheel. If enough liquidity providers and developers and corporate finance teams start treating XRP like digital duct tape, something so useful you keep it on hand and stock up extras just in case, then the story shifts from hype to genuine infrastructure reality. Here are the key stats one more time for those of you who love numbers. $700 billion in daily settlement value, 1-second transaction speed, 56.5 billion circulating supply, 10% discount rate, 5-year adoption horizon. Those inputs combined with 530 trillion in store of value demand produce that headline price. Swap that demand down to 100 trillion and you still get $98 per XRP. Push it up to 1 quadrillion and you are looking at $9,000 per XRP. Feel free to pause and let those numbers sit for a moment. Let me illustrate the flywheel concept in the simplest possible way. Imagine you own a bakery and word spreads that your croissants are absolutely incredible. Demand shoots up so you raise prices. Because they are now more expensive, customers start buying extras to save for special occasions. That hoarding means fewer croissants in the display case, which makes them look even rarer. The line outside gets longer. That cycle feeds itself until you are essentially printing money. In XRP's world, replace croissants with liquidity, and you have got the basic idea. But we cannot ignore the real limitations. Val Hill openly admits they cannot predict future use cases. They do not include derivatives or real estate. They are not accounting for central bank digital currencies potentially entering the picture. These numbers could swing dramatically in either direction. And that is completely okay. A financial model is a flashlight that helps you see in the dark. It is not a crystal ball that tells you exactly what is going to happen. Here is a quick story that captures my own journey between doubt and belief. 2 years ago, a friend who builds payment systems called me up genuinely excited, saying his client had just cut their settlement times from 2 full days down to 2 seconds using XRP rails. He was buzzing with energy. That story stuck with me because it was not theoretical anymore. It was a real business solving a real problem overnight. That kind of tangible real-world proof is exactly the kindling that the flywheel needs to start spinning. Now, please remember that the goal here is absolutely not to convince you to risk your financial security on XRP. Please do not do that. The goal is simply to help you understand how a serious and credible valuation firm can build a logical case that reaches some very surprising conclusions. Whether reality ever actually climbs to those heights is a completely separate question. but the framework and the logic behind it are genuinely fascinating to think about. Quick important reminder: I am not a financial advisor, and nothing in this video is financial advice. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile, and you could lose everything you invest. Always do your own research and consult a qualified professional. Your investments are entirely your own responsibility, and nothing is ever guaranteed. Neither I, nor this channel, nor YouTube are liable for any losses. This video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Now coming back to adoption mechanics. 10% of global transactions by 2030 might sound impossible until you remember how quickly the world has transformed before. Think about the jump from physical mail to email, from taxicabs to ride-sharing apps, from printed paper maps to GPS navigation on your phone. Once a new technology genuinely cuts costs and removes friction, the old way of doing things tends to fade faster than butter left in the sun. If XRP meaningfully outperforms traditional payment rails on both speed and cost, the path of least resistance starts tipping toward adoption in a very significant way. Add in the psychological element of people who love stories about things going up dramatically in value, and you have a powerful additional force. The kind of headline that says this thing went up 1,000 times in value is the kind of story that even your grandmother's book club will gossip about. The moment mainstream media picks up on a significant price rally, as we have already seen happen with Bitcoin, the feedback loop hits turbo mode. More attention brings more buyers. More buyers means tighter supply. Tighter supply pushes the price higher. Rinse and repeat. Here is a mental exercise. Close your eyes and picture a world where XRP actually does break past $1,000. Companies that accumulated XRP for its practical utility suddenly find themselves sitting on enormous capital gains that dwarf whatever they saved on transaction fees. They brag about it to their competitors. Their competitors scramble to catch up. Adoption spikes, and the growth is not linear at that point. It is viral. Of course, every cycle has a potential off switch. If the XRP ledger stopped improving, if transaction fees somehow increased dramatically, if the community became divided and governance broke down, the flywheel could grind to a halt. But so far, the ledger has been consistently and quietly improving, with new features, side chains, and better development tools being added regularly. Whether that pace is fast enough to stay ahead of the competition remains the big question. For those of you who love the practical side, here is how I personally check whether these kinds of ambitious models are holding up over time. First, I write down the key assumptions and put them somewhere visible so I can check them regularly. Second, I review real-world progress every quarter. Are actual payment corridors switching to XRP? Is liquidity growing on the ledger? Third, I make sure my position size is set so that even if every single projection turns out to be completely wrong, my overall financial situation stays stable. That might sound boring, but it is absolutely essential. Now let us talk about the scenario where the flywheel really hits its peak speed. Imagine one of the top 5 global banks announcing that the XRP ledger is now the backbone of all its treasury settlement operations. That single announcement could do more for XRP's price in one day than years of grassroots community building. Because in finance, nobody wants to be the institution that looks outdated and left behind. Once one major blue-chip financial player makes that move, the rest will rush to follow. If that domino falls within the next 5 years, Valhill's adoption timeline suddenly starts looking conservative rather than bold. Before we wrap up, another quick mention of Blowfin. If you are exploring where to buy or sell XRP, check them out through the affiliate link in the description. Transparent fees and a clean user interface are what they are known for, and the link helps cover the cost of producing content like this. So let us bring this all home. Valhill Capital's model paints a picture of a future where XRP transforms from a fast payment tool into a genuine global store of digital value. They break it down into 3 stages. First is the adoption spark, where real-world use drives initial price growth. Second is the pricing feedback, where higher prices attract more long-term holders. Third is the self-reinforcing store of value loop, where scarcity and demand build on each other continuously. Even after excluding enormous markets like derivatives and real estate, they still arrive at numbers that raise eyebrows. Could they be completely wrong? Absolutely possible. Could they actually be underestimating what happens? Stranger things have occurred. Just ask anyone lucky enough to have bought Bitcoin at $10. So here are my key takeaways from all of this. First, exponential growth curves are really hard for human beings to intuitively understand. Pay attention to the flywheel dynamic rather than expecting straight-line growth. Second, stories and narratives matter just as much as spreadsheet numbers. Adoption moves faster when people can personally connect with the idea and feel like it is inevitable. Third, models are roadmaps, not ironclad contracts. Update your thinking as new information comes in and the landscape changes. You've used 90% of your session limit upgrade.